welcome to Comic Books and You. Today we're going to review a crowd-funded comic, Alpha Dogs, issue 1. The campaign for issue 4 just ended last week as of the recording of this video. One of the perks available was issues 1 through 4 in a digital package, which is what I've gotten. The campaign for issue 1 was supported by 108 backers for a total of $3,322 on Kickstarter. I would say in March 2021. That's the first update I see on the website. One thing we do have in this campaign is a fairly nice graph of where the money is going to be spent. Printing and shipping taking 40%, illustration, coloring, and lettering 35%, 10% for contingencies, which would probably end up being in all sorts of different things. Rewards 5% and 10% fee for Kickstarter and financial fees. 10% for this is fairly high in my opinion, but it's the more or less standard in the crowdfunding industry. There are alternatives and there are other things that a campaign can use. I do know from interactions with the people at Fund My Comics that they take a 3% cut of the campaign, unlike Kickstarter, who takes between 5 and 10%, depending on how big of a campaign it is, how well the campaign's doing, how much they like you. I mean, with Kickstarter, you never really know. Kickstarter is far from my platform of choice. They're extremely trigger happy with canceling, banning people. The one platform I would recommend right now to any semi-serious people would be Fund My Comics. They are very independent. They are open-minded and open to all sorts of comments and change. It's a pretty good platform overall from experience I've had with them. Indiegogo is also a little bit better than Kickstarter, even though they do have their own set of problems. In the end, choose the one that fits your need as a campaign creator, but just start looking around rather than always going to the same provider or always doing the same thing and hoping for the same result. Sometimes going to new platforms and new positions might actually help you in the long run. This comic came to my attention on Twitter. Someone shared it. I looked into it and talked with the creator just a little bit. And for $15, I got the digital package, which was enough for my needs here. This is a book about dogs, basically super dogs. I was joking around saying that this was a prequel to the Paw Patrol. It almost feels that way. You've got various super dogs, and we don't have much details as to where they're coming from. Our main character being Buck, who's a white pitbull with a black stripe on its face and a little black chest piece. He's got amazing powers of regeneration and superior intelligence. He's able to understand and comprehend human speech. He's very protective of his owner, Ina, and really loves her. He was raised by her from being a pup. We see that mostly in issue 2, however. And he doesn't seem to think of the consequences of his actions all that much, which is a part of the problem he encounters in this particular book. The second large dog ear is Cyrus. I made a mistake here in the other ear. Cyrus is Buck's big brother, another pit bull with superior intelligence. I suppose he's got regenerative abilities as well. He's a geriatric dog, much older than Buck. I don't really know how old Buck is. Cyrus does seem to be much older, probably 8, 9 years old, something along those lines. He's far less caring of Ina. He's disdainful and distrustful of humans, but he's also ready to comply with orders when they are given to him. A bit of a different character than Buck. For our humans, we've got Ina here, who's the owner of the two main dogs. She's a young biogeneticist who runs for a company called NextGen, who works on cancer therapy and regenerative work. She's been on the run with her dog for an extended period of time and settled in that isolated farmhouse where they live and tries to stay out of sight and out of mind. Our last character here of significance is Salem, who's a young man who's working with Ina. It says in the book that he's a subordinate of Ina, but if you read the further volumes, you realize that Ina is subordinate. Understandable sometimes that we have some small mistakes like this in a book. He's actually manipulating Ina in order to get access to her dogs and her blood for his own experiments. He is also the owner of another improved dog called Monto, who's a cane corso, another fairly large breed of dog. So we've got a bit of a nice mix of characters here. There's a few others that are not as significant. Those characters are the ones that we're going to follow through most of those issues that we already received. We're only covering issues 1 in this video. We'll see if we cover the rest later. The story so far, Buck, at the start of the story, is lying on a beach, dying, 4 gunshot wounds to the chest. An animal control officer is called on the scene by what I can only call a Karen to try to get rid of the corpse. But as he gets there, he realizes that the dog is still alive and runs to get a first aid kit. Buck's regenerative abilities, though, are kicking in, and the bullets pop out of his chest, and he gets back up in order to find the people who shot him and possibly get revenge. We'll see when we get to that point in a later issue, probably. We then get a flashback to 4 months earlier, which is really the core of our story, and Buck is waiting eagerly for the return of his owner. Lets a butterfly into the door as well, just to look at it, and Cyrus decides to berate him for being such a good dog, as he has no pride, just being a regular, human dog. They discuss a little bit their origin, but Cyrus is being intentionally vague about the whole thing and doesn't give a clear answer to Buck. Ina comes back home, and Buck gets ready to greet her, but he notices that she invited Salim with her, and she tells her dog that she's in love with him and that there would be no secret between them. So she told him about the abilities of her dogs. Of course, as we know, this is a bit of a ploy by him to get access to the dog's blood. And as Ina go take a shower, Salim talks to Cyrus, talking about someone called Little Bill, and that he can bring him back to greatness in exchange for some of his blood. So he draws a bit of blood from Cyrus. Buck comes in as he is finishing drawing the blood and realizes that Salim's probably a bad guy. So he takes a dislike to him, barks at him, and growls at him. But Ina kind of disregards what her dog is doing and still tries to patch things between them. Buck, however, tries to make Ina realize that Salim is bad, so he decides to bite off 3 of his fingers. In a panic, Ina drives Salim to an hospital while reprimanding her dog, and this part of the story is closed, and we move to another flashback, which is 4 weeks later. We meet 2 of Salim's hired hands, Toby, who is the smaller and weaker of the 2, and the one that I call Goon number 2 because I can't remember his name and I don't even remember reading it. Toby is getting bullied by 2 other thugs, 2 other criminals, and Goon number 2 shows up, beats them up, and they drive together to get to Salim's house. And we meet Munto, the dog, and go into Salim's lab, where we learn that Cyrus' blood is a match for Munto's dog blood, it seems. We have not much information here overall, except that we see the chopped off fingers on Salim's hand. There are quite a few little issues with this story. We'll talk about this more in length later on. Is it horrible? No, it works and it's functional. We know the narrative's there, and there is a good story here, but there's work that would have needed to be done on it. Like I said, we'll get into it a little bit more later. Cover works pretty well. We've got our main character in the middle of an alley. We've got that syringe of blood, which is important in the grand scheme of things. So that's pretty good overall. I'm not liking the other aggressive dogs in the back or the mean looking dogs in the back. In that particular position, if I was working on a cover, I'd have my main dog in the front and something he's protecting in the back. That's how composition for a cover like this generally would work. Still probably a cover that would have moved a decent number of issues and number of units. And the novelty of a dog based comic. Many dog based comics that we have out there are more caricatures and comical. This is more of a more serious type of story. Not a terrible cover overall, but the composition would have needed work in order to be more attractive and more, I was going to say standard. But yes, it would need this particular cover probably would have needed a little bit more work to be more attractive. As far as Paratext go, I only have a digital copy of this book, so I can't tell you how it feels, how it holds up with the physical copy in my hands. Digital copy is clean, not too heavy. It's a PDF format, very basic. I already contacted the author for some improvement that he would need to do on the digital distribution side of things, at least on a short-term basis. The next part here is for all creators who deal with PDF copies. When you're releasing PDF copies, you need to have a website with a sign-up system where you're going to have people with an ID code. Then, once you get the repository of the file set up, when they download their file is watermarked with their customer name, customer number. All of the PDF issues are marked, and you know if there's a leak or if there's a problem with one of your issue. Of course, if you're not a big time person or if you care about that as well, you can also use Drive-Thru Comics, who does that for you. Of course, that will take a cut out of your revenue once again. So when we were looking at that graph earlier, if you were going to go through Drive-Thru Comics, that would be another element to add to that graph. But maybe not the worst element. And through Drive-Thru Comics, you're always going to be able to sell the issues over time. So you might actually generate a bit of revenue over time. I'm not sure how Drive-Thru works in terms of payments and everything. I've never had to deal with them directly except from buying from them. Artistic merits, well, let's go with the big dog in the room. Well, are dogs nice? Well, the dogs are really good. The art on the animal here are really good. They've got nice facial expressions as well. You can see what they're talking about. You can see how they're feeling through the art on it. So this is what is really important in this particular book. So that's the thing that you can count on this particular book, thankfully. Since pit bulls are less of a breed and more of a collective of mutt with similar traits, Buck and Cyrus do look like the standard idea of a pit bull that we can recognize through the ages. Salem's dog is a Cane Corso. It looks really good as well. It's fairly well identified. As we go in later issues, we see other breeds of dogs, all of them really well represented. So that's a very good point for this particular comic. Unfortunately, the humans are weaker overall. They're not terrible. Okay, Marvel currently has a bunch of artists who are worse than this by a significant margin, not just a small one, a really bad one. Proportions are okay. They look appropriate for the role they have in the story. Nothing out of sort, nothing out of the ordinary. So we don't have Liefeld shapes. We don't have Jim Lee's extremes. This is a workable set of characters. Problem is some of the facial expressions on especially secondary character are not as good, especially on the non-main character, Toby, the people bullying him here in this scene. Ina and Salem do have a few fairly good shots and fairly good representation. But here, this is really the worst. The goon that's bullying Toby, I feel like his face is like photoshopped on just a regular model character. It doesn't look right in this particular set of panels. Another issue I have is, like I was saying, the characters look like models. What I mean by that is standard, just the kind of character you draw just to have a character, or the kind of representation you have in how to draw comic kind of books. They're not imaginative, they're not special in any way, and it does feel like some of their features are tacked on rather than drawn from the start. It's not terrible, but this is something that is a bit remarkable when you start looking at it in multiple takes, like I did. I mean, I have to read those books quite a few times to set up those reviews. The action scene between humans that we have is also fairly weak. It's functional, it doesn't need to be longer than it is, but it's not top notch and it's not something that I would recommend as far as an action scene. There's composition issues here that need to be addressed. This is basically a work in progress or a work that needs to have work on it. But you can see that the artist has a understanding of action and an understanding of movement, which you don't always have in these kinds of more independent, low-end comics. The mechanical designs that we have here, we've got two cars. They're workable, perfectly functional. I mean, with the amount of resources we have nowadays to get access to cars and things to draw, this is a still a very good representation of two cars in a proper perspective. Very, very workable and nothing that surprises me, but nothing that draws my attention either as something being wrong with those vehicles. The background work is perfectly functional, nothing fantastic, nothing unusual, but it fits the places where our characters are. The farmhouse looks good. This particular portion, that works really well. Same with the panel work. It's pretty good overall. The page real estate is fairly well used. You've got some bleeding panels. You've got full pages that are very well executed to split the story around and bring attention to very specific events. The panel work, quite successful. Overall, this is a functional book. It's better than some indie comics, especially the, let's face it, more Cal Art style indie comics. And it's even better than some of the major publishers in terms of the art, because we have seen already, like with my review, One Bad Day Joker, where things can get really bad. And I think everybody's been trolling around the internet in the comic sphere has seen things like the new Miss Marvel, well, Captain Marvel now, and the recent announcement for Bird of Prey with Zelith being included in it, who looks not good at all. This is a very functional book in terms of the art. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that puts it out against competition. If we want to read the story and we want to have decent art, this works just fine. As far as story elements go, the author was clear in his intention when he created his Kickstarter, saying that dogs, like people, are not born bad or good, and I believe that how they are raised that dictates their personality. Let's not get into that too much. This was the statement made by the author. Another theme of alpha dogs is the pain felt by dogs and children when their owner parents abandons them after taking up a new lover. The themes are clearly stated here, and they are very well represented in this particular book and the upcoming issues as well. Like I said, we're just covering issues 1 this time. This is one of those cases where I'm not even going to have to go into very deep things. The author did it really well himself, and I recognize those themes myself without having read his original statement, the statement I found when I was researching to review the comic. So this is a good statement, and the story elements reflect his statement in part. We'll see where there's issues. Buck is extremely protective of Ina, and you can tell that he would be ready to do anything for her. But of course, he has issues expressing it since he can't talk. That's where the Paw Patrol dogs are a bit superior to Buck since they can talk. So I'm still stuck up on that. Sorry. But I mean, this would be an interesting future in this story if Buck was able to talk and able to express himself better. I do enjoy seeing that our animal control officer is represented as a decent human being. Animal control officers, just like police, have a very, very bad rep. And actually, animal control officers have an even worse rep than police officers because everyone basically sees them as dog catchers and just grabbing dogs in order to get them to the ASPCA or the SPCA, and most of the time getting them killed. A lot of animal control officers do love animals and have very good skills with them, just never reach the level to become, a vet or something like that. It is good to see one here that is ready to not only do his job as a animal control officer, but ready to help out the animals in need. Our criminal elements are represented as a schemer, a pathetic loser, and a headstrong, more action type character with goon number 2. We have a nice range of bad guys, ranging from the most despicable person to a character who's just doing a job for the money, more than likely. So this does give a good life to our villain crew. In this particular book, we don't have a villain dog. As we move on in issues 2, we'll see Munto again as a more villainous dog, which will be more interesting here as an addition to this team of bad guys who are all very interesting. There is, however, a major failure by the author, especially with his stated themes, as Buck assaults Salem and cause major bodily harm. This makes very little sense, especially if he's taken to the hospital. The first thing they're going to do is, how did you lose your fingers? And even if he lies, it's really easy to notice a dog bite. This is a standard kind of injury that my father, who was a doctor, saw quite often. Same thing, whether you're a doctor and you receive someone with a dog bite, well, they need to find the dog. They need to check the dog to see if he's got rabies or any other illnesses. Buck, in this particular situation, would have been taken away immediately by any sane animal control officer, once again. The fact that Salem didn't press charges and Salem didn't do anything like that would give Ina an immediate idea that he has ulterior motives. Even if you're madly in love with someone, losing 3 fingers is a pretty major injury first time you're meeting your lover's dogs. This is an extremely weak portion of the story here overall. I mean, at that point, if I was Salem, I wouldn't even have worried too much. I would have gone to my 2 hired goons, dressed them up as animal control officers, show up at the door, and get Buck out. Would Ina have shot at them? More than likely. And would possibly have made the book even a bit more entertaining with a little bit more action. Like I said, this is probably one of the weaker points in the story and kind of breaks verisimilitude in this case, if you know at least a little bit about animal bites are generally controlled by medical crew. Pacing here is also really weird. We start the comic with a 5-page current time exposition where we see Buck dying on the beach. 5 pages is just way too long for this type of expositional introduction, especially since we have no real action in there. This would not catch attention of someone flipping through the comic, seeing if they want to buy it. We then switch to our extended flashback sequence, which starts with another block of exposition, and that slows the pace down as well. Too much exposition is not advantageous in comics. I just listened to Mike Barron doing a discussion with Eric July the other day, and this was part of what Mike Barron was talking about, that stories have to be interesting from the start, and they have to have that drive to make you want to read it from the start, and blocks of exposition is generally not the way to do it. The interaction between the 2 main dogs before Ina and Salem come home, that's properly paced, that's set up properly. This particular bit, I've got very little to say about. We then get the introduction of Salem, him getting Cyrus's blood. It's a bit long overall. It breaks the pace a little bit, but it is part of the story and it's sort of well set up. Could it have been a bit shorter? Maybe. Could it have added a little bit more action? More than likely. We already discussed that Buck's angry reaction to Salem is problematic to the teams promoted by the author, but that particular part is also well paced. Just long enough for us to understand what's going on. The rescue of Toby by goon number 2 is pretty useless in the grand scheme of things. You could probably have slashed those pages off and give us more time with Monto and Salem in his lab. And in this case, have a bit of show don't tell, reduce the exposition, and give us more information as to what Salem is trying to do. As I was saying here, the pacing is really weird and would need work. Story wise, I'll say here the book would have needed one or two more rounds of edits, probably one or two more rewrites, fixing the pacing issues, fixing some of the themes being discussed. You could have Buck attack Salem but not maim him. That would have been a better story overall. It works well, but it should be faster. Okay, there should be less exposition, more show, less tell. It's an introduction to our character in our universe, but we don't get everything we need. We don't have the motivations for our bad guys. We don't have our motivations for our main character, except for Buck, who wants to protect Ina. That's all we really have in this particular book. When you read the blurb from the Kickstarter, there's all sorts of elements that are there that are not represented in this comic, which is a bit of an issue when you're trying to sell a comic through Kickstarter. If I had backed this from issue 1, I probably would not have backed the other issues. I'll be honest with everyone. Having issues 2 and 3 in my back pocket, it's a little bit better. Issues 3 being really the strongest of the three. We see an improvement on the writing, we see an improvement on the art, book over book, which is very, very nice to see, especially when you see those developing artists and those developing authors. Am I happy and expectant for issue 4? Yes, I am. I'll be more than glad to read it and see where this story is going. Issue 4 being apparently the end of the first arc. Interestingly enough, like I said, with issue 1, I wouldn't have kept it going. With issues 2, maybe. With issues 3, for sure, I want to see issue 4. And this was my overall review of this particular book. I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day. I thank you very much for listening to me. Keep on reading comic, keep on enjoying them. I'll keep analyzing them, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.